a lesson no one was meant to survive, and a killer with something to teach. Welcome to Mystery Parlour. I am your host, Axon. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. Your voices make these mysteries unforgettable. Let's begin. On the second Saturday of May, the annual civic luncheon of Flaxborough was expected to proceed with its usual combination of tepid cheerfulness and tepid sherry. The event had been conceived many years before as a celebration of municipal efficiency, which perhaps explained why no one could recall what it was actually supposed to celebrate. By 11 o'clock, the assembly rooms had taken on the genteel bustle peculiar to small-town ceremonies. Mrs. Maybury of the Ladies' Comfort Society was seen directing a pair of reluctant school prefects in the delicate art of unfolding tablecloths without leaving handprints. Alderman Price, in a suit that conveyed authority by sheer persistence, hovered nearby, feigning interest in the positioning of the floral centerpieces. "I rather think the mayor should be seated opposite the dessert trolley," he remarked, as though the trolley were a diplomatic representative. "That way the photographers will capture his better side." Mrs. Maybury, who had seen both of the mayor's sides and found them equally uncompromising, smiled without agreement. "Indeed, Alderman, but then we should also consider the light. No one wants the mayor squinting in the Chronicle." This harmless dispute might have filled another half-hour had not a small but curious incident intervened. When the caretaker, Mr. Blenkinsop, opened the door to the storeroom to fetch another set of glass tumblers, he did not expect to find a man sitting on an upturned crate, perfectly still, as though waiting for applause. The man's expression was one of mild surprise, but it was the sort of surprise that had long since ceased to be of consequence to him. "Good Lord," Blenkinsop murmured. "Mr. Pomfret?" There was no reply. By the time the first ambulance arrived, half the town knew that poor Mr. Pomfret, clerk of rates and something of a stickler for neat arithmetic, had been found dead in the stores. The other half knew he had been found dead by the stores, which gave rise to an entirely different set of rumors about the Liquor Licensing Committee. Within an hour, the assembly rooms were cleared of luncheon crockery and filled instead with conjecture. Inspector Purbright, who had been enjoying a rare Saturday devoted to pruning roses and pondering the resilience of greenfly, received the call just after noon. "Unnatural death," said Sergeant Malley over the telephone, in the tone of one announcing a disappointing raffle prize. "At the assembly rooms, sir. Mr. Pomfret of Borough Accounts." Purbright sighed gently, brushed a trace of soil from his sleeve, and replaced the receiver. "Mr. Pomfret," he said aloud, as if considering a forgotten acquaintance. "Yes, the sort of man who would have balanced his own obituary." By the time he reached the assembly rooms, the air had the faintly ceremonial chill that follows a sudden tragedy in a civic building. Mrs. Maybury stood near the entrance, supervising the moral tidiness of proceedings, while Dr. Hockley, the police surgeon, whose sense of humor survived chiefly in the form of complaint, knelt beside the body. "Heart?" Purbright inquired mildly. "Possibly," said Hockley, "or possibly not. Depends what one means by heart." The dead man, still sitting upright on his crate, looked faintly embarrassed, as though he might at any moment apologize for the inconvenience. Purbright studied him for a moment longer than necessary. "No sign of disturbance?" "None," said Hockley, "unless you count dying without permission." Alderman Price arrived just in time to appear helpful. "Tragic business, Inspector. Tragic. I always said Pomfret worked too hard. A model servant of the borough, tireless, meticulous, and not much loved," added Mrs. Maybury quietly. Purbright gave her a brief glance that might have been approval. Outside, the early afternoon bells began to sound from St. Ethelburga's, calling the untroubled faithful to their pudding and roast. Within, the murmurs of civic sorrow gathered momentum, and already someone had remembered, inaccurately, that Mr. Pomfret had once been mixed up in the council's mysterious stationery audit. Purbright looked again at the neat, lifeless figure on the crate and murmured, "And so begins another lesson in human industry." Then, with a sigh that was not quite impatience, he turned to Sergeant Mallet. "Fetch the list of everyone who was to attend this luncheon. Alive, preferably." By mid-afternoon, the news of Mr. Pomfret's demise had reached every teacup in Flaxborough. It travelled not through official channels, but along the far swifter routes of curiosity and conjecture, those nimble couriers of the English provincial spirit. By the time Inspector Purbright left the assembly rooms, there were already 4 distinct versions of how the man had met his end, and none of them bore more than a passing resemblance to the likely truth. At the Green Swan, Mrs. Blenner Hassett confided to the barmaid that Pomfret had been found clutching a bottle of gin. The barmaid, taking this to be civic gin, elaborated that the mayor's office had supplied it. Across the street, at the ladies' hairdresser's, Miss Doreen Vole declared with solemn relish that it was the tax forms that killed him. Poor soul, too honest to live amongst figures. Each retelling lent the affair the kind of solemn absurdity that passed for wisdom in Flaxborough. Purbright, meanwhile, had returned to the police station, that brick-and-stone institution which appeared perpetually in the act of suppressing a sneeze. In his office, sparsely furnished except for a potted plant of ambiguous health, he sat with Sergeant Malley, going over the first report. "No sign of struggle," Malley read aloud. "No indication of forced entry. Cup and saucer on the shelf, only one used. Door was locked when found from the inside." He paused. "Looks straightforward enough, sir. Probably heart failure, just as Dr. Hockley said." Purbright leaned back, fingers interlaced across his waistcoat. "Yes, heart failure is a most accommodating diagnosis. It tends to accompany any death that seems inconveniently dull." Malley frowned, uncertain whether that was meant as approval or irony. "Shall we take it as natural causes, then?" Purbright regarded him kindly. "Let us, for the moment, take it as unnatural calm. There is a difference." The inspector's gaze drifted toward the window, where the late afternoon light slanted across the market square. A few townsfolk were still clustered near the assembly rooms, lingering with the respectable eagerness of those who wish to be thought above gossip while practicing it diligently. "Pomfret," Purbright said softly, as though testing the name for echoes. "A man of habit, routine, the sort who kept receipts for his own birthday gifts. And yet he sits in a locked storeroom on a Saturday morning, looking for all the world like a man waiting for company that never came. Why there? Why then?" Malley, who distrusted questions that had the air of sermons, shifted uneasily. "He was due at the luncheon, wasn't he?" "Yes," Purbright replied. "Due but not desired. There are many kinds of attendance, Sergeant. Some are looked forward to, others are endured." He rose, smoothing his jacket. "We'll begin by asking who was prepared to endure him." Their first call was upon the mayor, Councillor Granby, whose sense of self-importance had achieved the rare distinction of being both comic and contagious. His house on Vicarage Lane exuded the odour of privilege on loan. "My dear Inspector," Granby exclaimed, extending a hand with the authority of one offering civic blessing. "A deplorable business, utterly deplorable. I told the press just now that Mr. Pomfret's passing leaves a gap in the administrative heart of the borough." Purbright accepted the hand gravely. "Indeed, though I believe the accounts department might phrase it as a vacancy." The mayor chuckled uncertainly. "Quite so, quite so. Do sit down. Terrible shock, of course. But, these things happen. The strain of public service, you know." "Possibly," said Purbright. "Was Mr. Pomfret known to be in ill health?" "None that I heard of. Though between ourselves he was rather, how shall I put it, intense. A perfectionist. He once submitted a complaint because the official minute book contained 2 commas where one would have sufficed. The man lived by punctuation." "Which can be dangerous," Purbright murmured. People have been hanged for less. Granby blinked, uncertain if this was humour. I can assure you, Inspector, the borough office is the picture of harmony. Petty jealousies, perhaps, but no serious discord. Purbright inclined his head. Jealousies are rarely petty to those who feel them. When they left, Malley said, "He sounded genuine enough." "He sounded rehearsed," said Purbright. "That's not the same thing." Their next visit took them to the council offices themselves. Silent now, except for the echo of recent curiosity. Pomfret's desk, neat as a sermon, remained untouched. A single pencil lay aligned precisely with the edge of a ledger. In the wastebasket lay a torn envelope marked "Personal." Purbright retrieved it, smoothing the fragments on the desk. Only a few words could be made out. "Not be spoken of again, for all our sakes." He looked at it for a long moment. "What do you make of that, Sergeant?" Malley shrugged. "Sounds like a love affair, sir, or a quarrel." "Possibly both. In Flaxborough, they often come under the same heading." As they turned to leave, the cleaning woman entered, Mrs. Grover, stout, vigilant, and the repository of every conversation conducted within 30 yards of a mop bucket. "Oh, Inspector, I was that sorry to hear about poor Mr. Pomfret," she began, eyes already alight with the thrill of confidential service. "Always so particular, he was. Wouldn't let me dust his desk unless I promised to move each paper back exactly how I found it." "Did he ever have visitors here, Mrs. Grover?" "Oh, yes, now and then. Mostly that lady from the town clerk's office. Miss Collingwood, the pretty one with the spectacles. She'd come by after hours sometimes. I'd hear them talking soft-like. Not improper, mind you. Just private." Purbright smiled faintly. "Private conversations are rarely improper in Flaxborough, Mrs. Grover, provided they stay private." When they emerged once more into the mild evening, the inspector paused at the top of the steps and looked back toward the market square, where the lamps were beginning to glow through a mist of gossip. "Find out about Miss Collingwood," he said. "And, Sergeant, look into that stationery audit from last year. I fancy Mr. Pomfret may have balanced something other than ledgers." As they walked away, the bells of St. Ethelburga's chimed the hour again, discreetly marking the passage of time in a town where nothing truly passed without being measured, discussed, and quietly misinterpreted. Morning put a modest shine on Flaxborough, the sort bestowed when a town chooses respectability over memory. Inspector Purbright reached the council offices a little after 9. Sergeant Malley waited on the stairs with a thin file and the hopeful look of a man expecting nature to be tidy today. "I looked into Miss Collingwood," Malley said as they climbed. "Judith, 26, clerk to the town clerk, lives with an aunt on Beach Lane. Her reputation is punctual and not much else." "Punctuality," Purbright murmured, "is the sort of virtue that irritates people who are unsure whether they are late or wrong." They found Judith Collingwood in the typing room, spectacles bright, posture that had shaken hands with self-discipline. Purbright introduced himself. She folded her fingers and stood still. "I understand you saw Mr. Pomfret on Friday evening," he said. "Yes, until a little after 6. He dictated a memorandum about the stationery audit. He believed last year's orders had been, his word was, inflated. He intended to mention the matter informally to the mayor at the luncheon." "Did he strike you as anxious?" "Exact rather than anxious," she said. "He feared sloppiness, not people." "Any visitors to his room last week? Mr. Alderton, perhaps?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Thursday afternoon. Mr. Alderton brought a box of place cards for the luncheon, saying he had the lists. He's very willing." "Willingness at public expense is still willingness," Purbright said. "Thank you." Purchasing accommodated Mr. Alderton, a man whose friendliness arrived like a deputation. Tragic, Inspector. Pomfret was the rock under everything. "Rocks can trip the unwary," Purbright replied. "You were delivering place cards on Thursday." "Lending a hand," Alderton said. I pop about. As for those old invoices, clerical miscodes, staff turnover, Miss Vole will tell you the muddle." Miss Collingwood observed no muddle. "She wouldn't," he said, then coloured. "I mean, she's precise." When they left, Mally muttered, "If honesty sweats, his is in training." "Sweat confesses what speech regrets," Purbright said. "Let us look again at the room." The assembly rooms admitted them with the dry smell of polish. In the storeroom, the air held something cooler, a faint metal tang. Purbright stood where Pomfret had sat, considering the floor, two compacted ovals of dust by the crate's legs, a third near the wall as though someone had leaned in. On the shelf, the single cup and saucer had been bagged, but dust elsewhere offered a comment. A pale crescent where, not long before, a second cup had rested. Mally crouched. Could have been wiped. "Wiping leaves politeness," Purbright said. "This leaves expectancy. He met someone, or hoped to." The door's lock was simple, the key on the inner shelf where tidy minds place responsibility they intend to resume. Mally tried the lock, satisfied it could have trapped no one unwilling to be trapped. "A man might lock it and die," he said. "Or sit with company, accept bad tea, and die before courtesy expired," Purbright replied. "Flaxborough prefers the second." They went to the clerk's office. Miss Doreen Vole was attending to lipstick. "I didn't see Mr. Pomfret yesterday," she began, but Judith was fluttering about. She thinks rules improve people. "Mr. Alderton was at the storeroom on Thursday with a box. Place cards," he said. "He writes like a schoolmaster, posing as amiable." "Anyone remark that the storeroom lock sticks?" Purbright asked. "The porter complains it does," she said. "But only for gentle hands. If you slam, it behaves." "Very like people," Purbright observed. "Thank you." Purbright said, "We'll call on Beech Lane." Judith Collingwood's aunt, Mrs. Darnley, looked natural guardian of other people's good behaviour. Tea arrived. Judith sat straight-backed. "There is one thing," she said. "Mr. Pomfret had me draft a letter to a supplier, Hamble and Brooke, complaining of poor paper. He said the borough was not paying for translucency. He kept a copy in his red folder." "Did he have the folder yesterday?" "I do not know. He carried it most of the week." "And did you ever drink tea with him?" "Once, on Wednesday. He apologized for the quality twice." Purbright smiled. "Two apologies is almost sentiment. Thank you, Miss Collingwood." Outside, Mally said, "Suppose Alderton cut a deal with the supplier. Pomfret sniffed it and someone shut him up. The locked door complicates it." "The door's a matter of manners," Purbright said. "So, I suspect, is the tea. We will speak to Hamble and Brooke today and to Alderton again tomorrow. Before that, a small stop with the mayor. I wish to know whether his better side drinks from China or municipal issue." They walked toward the square where shopkeepers tilted blinds against the light, and the town resumed being certain about everything it could not possibly know. Flaxborough approved, without knowing why, as usual. The mayor received them in his dining room, where a sideboard of trophies suggested victories of patience. Councillor Granby offered chairs. His wife hovered with a tray, keeping grief tidy. "You will have tea," she decreed. "This morning has been distressing." "Quite," said Purbright, examining the pale blue china with thinning gilt and a discreet crest. "Handsome service." "We loan it to the assembly rooms for important functions," Mrs. Granby said. "Mr. Blenkinsop fetches it. It went out yesterday." "Do odd pieces ever go?" Purbright asked. "Unpaired cups? Orphaned saucers?" "Certainly not. I check the inventory as it leaves and when it returns." "I am reassured," he said. Granby coughed. "Inspector, this tragedy mustn't overshadow the luncheon. We expected county visitors." "Did Mr. Pomfret plan to speak with you?" "He mentioned a tiresome anomaly. I suggested he put it in writing." "Very good." Purbright set his cup on its saucer. "If the service has returned, I should like to see it." It was fetched and taken to the assembly rooms. where Mr. Blenkinsop unlocked cupboards. Crates were opened. Purbright lifted cups and saucers one by one, then paused at a saucer whose glaze bore a faint roughness. "Repaired," Mally said. "Not a piece Mrs. Granby would lend if she had a perfect spare," Purbright murmured. "Unless it was the only one returned." Blenkinsop looked injured. "I sends 'em back as I gets 'em, sir." "I'm sure you do." Purbright closed the crates. "Now, Hamble and Brooke." The stationers perfumed the corner with paper. Mr. Brooke, dressed to lean over counters, greeted them. "A sorrow, Inspector. Mr. Pomfret kept us improving." "Few manage that," Purbright said. "We have his complaint about inferior paper." "Town cream wove," Brooke replied. "A batch displeased exacting fingers. We replaced what we could. There was also the place cards. Alderman Price ordered heavy stock. Your Mr. Alderton altered it to lighter board. Economy, he said. We invoiced accordingly. Later, a credit was requested on the original price. I declined. Mr. Pomfret called Tuesday, took notes in a red folder, and promised inquiries without fuss. No other supplier involved? None. Outside, Mally said, "So Alderton downgrades the card and tries to charge the old price. Petty, not murderous." "Petty reveals character," Purbright replied. "Character seeks convenience. We will ask Mr. Alderton how he balances thrift with display." The purchasing office smelt of carbon paper. Alderton spread damp candor over Brooke's account. "A minor adjustment, Inspector. The luncheon is only a luncheon. Any confusion was clerical." "Clerks rarely confuse arithmetic that favors them," Purbright said. "You visited the assembly rooms yesterday?" "I checked the table plan. I noticed nothing strange." "Does your willingness extend to washing cups?" Alderton blinked. "Cups? I leave that to ladies and caretakers." "In a storeroom," Purbright said, "one sometimes finds a cup that has worked harder than its saucer. It is then consoled by a sink." Alderton laughed too loudly. "Inspector, this is municipal catering, not intrigue." "Flaxborough embraces both," Purbright said. "If a box of place cards was in the storeroom Thursday, where is it now?" "In Miss Collingwood's cupboard," he answered. "Left-hand shelf." They walked the corridor. A typewriter clacked. The cupboard opened. Inside lay a box of cards, the lid unsealed. Purbright lifted the top layer. Names marched in neat capitals. The mayor, the mayoress, the county councillor. Then, "Mr. E. Pomfret, stores." Mally peered. "Meaning?" "Someone wanted him at the edge of things," Purbright said. "Stores, not accounts." He raised the stack. Beneath bare cardboard showed where another layer should have been. "Missing?" Mally asked. "Absent," said Purbright. "The word promises an explanation later." "Sergeant, get Mrs. Granby's tally of cups and saucers. Have Mr. Blenkinsop bring out the assembly room's own crockery. If one cup was borrowed from the borough set and smuggled back to the municipal lot, the sum on both sides will decline equally. And if everything balances. Then someone borrowed and replaced after washing. We shall detect cleverness by the trail left by tidiness." Miss Vole approached with the look of a witness surprised by her own memory. "I've remembered," she said. "Mr. Alderton asked me Friday to type a fresh name card for Mr. Pomfret. He said the original had a smudge. I told him Judith had the lists. He said not to bother her." "And did you type it?" "I did, on heavy stock from my drawer." He collected it himself. "Thank you," Purbright said. Mally nodded. "I'll ask Brooke if any heavy stock went out after the change." "Do," said Purbright. "Meanwhile, I shall examine sinks." He crossed toward the assembly rooms. A repaired saucer, a demoted name, and a missing layer of cards walked alongside like officials with files, each promising thrift, hidden under politeness, leaves quiet fingerprints where water dries. The assembly room's kitchen was deserted except for the odor of detergent and a thin puddle under the draining board that had resisted evaporation since Saturday. Purbright stood before the sink, as if expecting it to resume its civic duties by confession. On the rack, rows of cups gleamed obediently. He lifted one, turned it in his hand, and then set it back precisely where it had been. The repaired saucer, he murmured, had its partner here. Mally, who was rummaging among the dishcloths with a detective's optimism, looked up. "No chips, sir. All sound." "Sound is not necessarily innocent," said Purbright. He bent closer, examining the tiled sill beneath the window. The porcelain gleamed, but one section bore a faint brownish patch, circular and about the width of a cup's base. He touched it lightly, sniffed, and said, "Tea, not rust. Dried fast, perhaps overnight." Mally frowned. "You mean someone washed up late? Or in haste, the kind of haste that follows sudden inconvenience?" Purbright straightened, wiping his fingers with a handkerchief that looked capable of forgiving anything. "Mr. Pomfret's tea service may have received more than sugar." They left the kitchen and stepped into the corridor. It was empty, yet the air still held the aroma of stewed tea and damp wool, the municipal perfume of anxiety. At the far end, the caretaker appeared, hat in hand. "Excuse me, Inspector, I've checked the storeroom key again. It were in the lock when we found him, but I reckon someone's had another one made." Purbright looked at him mildly. "You reckon?" "Well, sir, the council keys are all numbered, see, and that one's missing its tag. Not since last month, I think." I told the office, but they said as how it didn't matter. "Only leads to a broom cupboard," they said. "Indeed," Purbright said, "and sometimes to the truth." He dismissed Blenkinsop and turned to Mally. "Ask the locksmith how many duplicates he supplied this year to the borough, and whether Mr. Alderton, in his willingness, has ever been a customer." They left the assembly rooms and walked toward the square, where lunchtime was conducting itself with the calm self-importance of routine. The butcher's window glittered with ambition, and across the street Miss Doreen Vole was confiding to a customer in the stationery shop that Inspector Purbright had discovered poison in the teapot. By the time they returned to the station, the story had already been embroidered with cinnamon and intrigue. Mally placed a paper on the desk. "Locksmith says Alderton had 2 duplicates cut in April. Said they were for stock cupboards. No record filed with council." Purbright nodded. "Then the key fits more than the cupboard." He paused. "Ask Mrs. Grover, the cleaner, to step in." Mrs. Grover arrived with an air of triumph disguised as humility. "You'll want to know about that storeroom, Inspector. I told Mr. Blenkinsop months ago that I couldn't get in Fridays for mopping. Too many boxes. Then last week, Thursday it was, Mr. Alderton told me not to bother at all, said he'd see to it himself. I thought that generous." "Generosity," said Purbright, "is often the art of doing things one prefers unobserved." She blushed, uncertain whether she'd been praised or rebuked. "And I saw him again Friday evening, going in there with his jacket over his arm. I remember because he had no briefcase, which is odd for him." "Very odd indeed." Purbright thanked her and watched her leave with the gait of one who expected to be quoted in the next edition of the Chronicle. Mally said, if he went there Friday evening, that's when he could have put something in the cup, or taken something out. "Possibly both," Purbright replied. "It depends which version of courtesy he was practicing." He tapped a pencil thoughtfully. "Alderton brings place cards, uses the key, perhaps meets Pomfret there on Saturday morning under the pretext of checking the layout. Pomfret, conscientious to the end, locks the door behind them. Tea is offered. Conversation grows. Inconvenient." Mally nodded grimly. "And Pomfret never leaves." "Quite so." Purbright rose. "We'll confirm the timeline before we decide who poured." That evening they called again on Miss Collingwood, whose composure had begun to show cracks at the edges. She opened the door before they could knock twice. "Inspector," she said quickly, "I've remembered something about Mr. Pomfret. He'd left a note on my desk Friday evening. It said only, 'See me tomorrow before the luncheon. Must have your witness.'" Then, his initials. Witness? Purbright repeated. Yes, I thought he meant an audit form. But now, she faltered. He'd been upset about Mr. Alderton's invoices. He said the mayor wouldn't believe it without proof. He wanted me there when he showed him the papers. Did he mention where the papers were kept? In the red folder, as always. Purbright smiled faintly. Which folder is not now in evidence. Thank you, Miss Collingwood. When they were outside, the evening air felt sharp with the certainty of coming revelation. He meant to confront the mayor, Malley said. So Alderton got wind, panicked, met him in the storeroom, and silenced him. An industrious theory, said Purbright. But human nature is rarely so efficient. Still, I believe you've named the correct company in the room. They walked toward the station, lamps flickering to life in a drizzle that made every street lamp appear to wear a halo of guilt. Purbright stopped suddenly at the corner where the newspaper board announced, "Council Clerk's Death Mystery Deepens." "Malley," he said quietly, "ask the post office if any parcels went out from the purchasing department Friday afternoon. Something small, wrapped perhaps, addressed with care. I suspect our red folder may be taking a brief holiday in the postal system." Malley looked up. "And Alderton? We'll not disturb him tonight. Let him think the town believes in heart failure. A conscience unchallenged often grows talkative." They resumed their walk, the inspector's umbrella tilted just enough to allow a thoughtful drizzle upon his shoes. Somewhere behind the curtained windows of Flaxborough, the respectable began to murmur again, piecing together their own investigation over tea that was, thankfully, only mildly poisonous. The following morning brought with it the washed-out glare peculiar to English towns after a night of gossip. The Chronicle had published its report under the headline, "Council Clerk's Sudden Death. Police Make Routine." Inquiry. The word routine had been chosen, Purbright suspected, less for accuracy than for reassurance. Flaxborough preferred its mysteries like its puddings, sweetened, small, and concluded before tea. At the station, Sergeant Malley was already at his desk, a cup of tea in one hand and a slip of paper in the other. "Postmaster says there was one parcel from the purchasing office, sir. Late Friday afternoon. Brown paper, string, 4p in stamps. Addressed to the Borough Audit Office in Calthorpe. Collected about 4:30. Signature, J. Collingwood." Purbright sat down carefully, as though easing himself into a complicated piece of music. Miss Collingwood's handwriting. "Could be forged," Malley said. "But the timing fits. If Pomfret expected her as witness Saturday morning, he'd have told her to post it. Only Alderton could have got to it first. Possibly, or he persuaded her to hand it over under some plausible pretext. Guilt often travels under a label marked efficiency." He opened the file before him and looked again at the coroner's preliminary report. Cardiac arrest induced by an alkaloid consistent with digitalis. "A dose small enough to sit well with tea," Purbright murmured. "Kindly enough to suggest friendship." Malley watched him. "You think Alderton slipped it in?" "I think Alderton brewed it, but before we settle on that, let's consider who supplied the leaves. I doubt the municipal stores stock foxglove." By mid-morning they were once more at the council offices. Miss Doreen Vole, the unwitting oracle of the typing pool, greeted them with brisk pleasure. "Inspector, I was just saying to Judith that it was strange Mr. Pomfret's death should be in the papers when the mayor told us not to talk about it." Purbright smiled gently. "Flaxborough has never been known to confuse silence with obedience. Tell me, Miss Vole, did anyone borrow your typewriter last Friday?" Her eyebrows rose in genuine indignation. "Certainly not. Except, well, Mr. Alderton did ask to use it for a quick address label. He said his secretary was out." "Only for a moment." Purbright nodded. "Do you recall what he typed?" "Something like Audit Department, Calthorpe. I remember because he asked if Collingwood had been in." Said she was supposed to post a parcel and hadn't done it yet. Thank you, Purbright said. You've helped more than you know. They found Alderton in his office, sleeves rolled up and conscience polished for inspection. Inspector, I hope this isn't more of that business. The council's reputation is at stake. Reputations, said Purbright, are rarely improved by haste. Did you dispatch any correspondence Friday afternoon? A few routine parcels. Samples, perhaps. To the Borough Audit Office? His smile wavered. Yes, that's right. Mr. Pomfret wanted them sent immediately. Miss Collingwood's name was used on the docket. She offered to sign. I was busy. I see. Tell me, Mr. Alderton, were you in possession of Mr. Pomfret's red folder? He blinked. He gave it to me himself. Said I should hold it till Monday to spare him lugging it home. Indeed. A considerate gesture from a man expecting to expose you the following day. Colour drained from Alderton's cheeks. Expose me? What nonsense is this? Purbright's tone did not alter. You altered invoices, changed specifications, and charged the borough the difference. Pomfret found out. The red folder contained the evidence. You thought to recover it before the luncheon made it public. That's absurd, Alderton said thickly. He was a friend. I fetched him tea. Yes, Purbright said quietly. From Mrs. Granby's civic service. The repaired saucer matches the missing cup you borrowed that morning. Alderton's mouth opened, but no words came. His fingers twitched toward the drawer, then stilled. Purbright's eyes followed the movement. You may fetch the folder, Mr. Alderton, but do so carefully. After a moment, Alderton drew it out. The red cover was smeared faintly with something pale, like chalk or spilled sugar. Inside were invoices, letters, and 2 folded sheets bearing the mayor's signature in rubber stamp form. At the bottom of one page was a neat notation. Adjust by 2 shillings per unit. Alderton. Purbright turned each page as though listening to them. A modest fortune in municipal thrift. He closed the folder and handed it to Malley. We'll keep this safe. Alderton's voice cracked. He said he'd ruin me over a few pence. I tried to explain. He laughed, said he'd go straight to Granby. I only meant to delay him, Purbright finished. You brought tea, talked of reconciliation, and used the digitalis you'd taken from the mayor's hothouse. The storeroom was quiet, the opportunity small but tempting. When he began to cough, you panicked, washed the cup, replaced it with one from the civic service, and locked the door behind you. A man like Pomfret would have insisted on turning the key. Alderton pressed a hand to his forehead. I didn't mean... He went so quickly. Purbright sighed. People do when respectability demands it. They led him away without ceremony. Outside, the square lay serene beneath an undecided sky. The florist across the way had already filled her window with lilies, and by afternoon, half the town would agree that poor Alderton had been driven to extremes by pressure of work. Purbright returned to his office, the red folder under his arm. He placed it in the drawer, shut it gently, and looked out at the square. The clock above the library struck noon, steady and self-assured. He smiled faintly. In Flaxborough, he said to no one in particular, even the crimes are punctual. The afternoon passed in a kind of civic unease, the sort that settles over a town when something unpleasant has occurred, but the timetable of life insists it must not. The mayor, apprised discreetly of Alderton's confession, declared it a sad lapse of judgment and hinted that a statement would be issued once the matter ceased to be regrettable. The phrase, like much in Flaxborough, conveyed nothing and satisfied everyone. Inspector Purbright, however, was not quite satisfied. He had returned to his office, where the faint smell of furniture, polish, and damp files lent the room a melancholy efficiency. Sergeant Malley entered, bearing 2 cups of tea and a face lined with relief. Well, that's that, sir. Alderton's made a full confession. The superintendent's pleased. Purbright accepted his cup, stirred it thoughtfully, and said, "Confessions, Mally, are like speeches at funerals. One must consider whether they're offered for the dead or the living." Mally frowned. "You think he's lying?" "Not entirely. A partial truth is a most comfortable sort of lie. It lets one rest upon it without quite standing." He looked up. "Something in Alderton's account doesn't fit. The poison, yes. The cup and saucer, yes. But the motive feels rehearsed. He spoke as though repeating what he thought we wanted to hear. He said Pomfret threatened to expose him." "Indeed. Yet Pomfret's note to Miss Collingwood asked for a witness. He was not a man to meet privately when he could meet properly. A public confrontation would have humiliated Alderton, but it would also have embarrassed the mayor. One wonders which outcome required the more permanent solution." Mally's brow furrowed. "You don't think, Granby?" Purbright smiled faintly. "Our mayor is ambitious, not courageous. But ambition breeds friends who act on its behalf. I find it curious that Alderton, whose caution was legendary, chose to handle the tea himself. That sort of duty usually devolves upon subordinates or upon those seeking favor." He rose, setting his cup aside. "Let's look again at the logistics. Pomfret drinks the tea, collapses almost instantly. Alderton, by his own story, panics, washes the cup, and leaves, locking the door. But he claims Pomfret still had the red folder in his hands. When we found him, it was not there. Who then removed it?" Mally hesitated. "Maybe he hid it somewhere in the room before he left. Yet we searched and found nothing, and later Alderton produces it from his office drawer, claiming Pomfret lent it to him the day before. That is convenient to the point of artistry." "So he could have come back after," Mally offered. Purbright nodded. "Yes, but the door was locked, the key inside. Unless—" He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "Unless he had help. Someone to relock it. Someone who might pass unnoticed among the civic faithful." A quiet knock interrupted them. It was Miss Collingwood, pale but composed, holding a folded paper. "Inspector, I thought you should see this. It was in my drawer this morning. I'm sure I didn't put it there." He took it gently. The paper was headed Borough Accounts, stationery audit, and bore Pomfret's neat, angular hand. The note read, "If this reaches you, it means I have not. The discrepancy is deeper than Alderton's invoices. Speak to Mrs. Granby." Purbright folded the paper slowly. "Thank you, Miss Collingwood. I rather think you've just complicated our morning." After she left, Mally muttered, "Mrs. Granby, the mayor's wife, she wouldn't—" "She might," Purbright said. "She guards her husband's image with the fervor of a curate's mother, and she controls the hospitality accounts. Every luncheon, banquet, and bouquet that bears the borough crest passes through her lists." Within the hour, they were shown into the Granby drawing-room again. Mrs. Granby received them with the serene offence of a woman perpetually interrupted at the height of her virtue. "Inspector, really, this is too much. I've answered every question twice. Must we go over it again?" "Only once more," Purbright said pleasantly. "Your china service, madam. How many cups and saucers remain unbroken?" "All accounted for," she said crisply. "I checked myself." "And yet the repaired saucer. Did you not once send a matching cup to the borough office for Mr. Pomfret's use?" She hesitated. "I may have done. He was forever borrowing things." "Borrowing," Purbright repeated. "A useful word. Did he borrow funds as well?" Her eyes flashed. "Inspector, I shall not sit here and—" Mr. Pomfret's note suggests the audit discrepancies reached beyond Alderton. The luncheon expenses, for instance. The catering invoices from Calthorpe. 2 bills, 1 genuine, 1 duplicated. Both bear your signature." Her breath caught. Then she recovered herself with impressive dignity. "Clerical oversight. My husband insisted I manage those matters. He detests arithmetic." "And Pomfret detested untidiness." You feared exposure, or at least embarrassment. Mr. Alderton, grateful for your patronage, agreed to assist. You told him Pomfret planned to ruin the luncheon with scandal, and he, eager to protect you, took measures. Her expression hardened. If you think I encouraged murder, I think you encouraged order, Purbright said softly. And sometimes order demands an unpleasant sacrifice. You lent him your key, perhaps even the cup. After all, who would suspect Alderton if the mayor's own household provided the means? She rose suddenly. I will not listen to this. Purbright inclined his head. You need not, madam, but you might consider where the foxglove grew, the hothouse behind your kitchen. I imagine the superintendent's men will confirm it by afternoon. When they stepped back into the street, the wind had begun to rise, scattering the scent of rain across the square. Mally exhaled slowly. So Alderton did it, but she arranged it. Arranged, yes. Directed, no. In Flaxborough, even murder observes hierarchy. The mayor's wife requests discretion. The subordinate interprets it liberally. Both obtain their peace, though briefly. He glanced toward the clock tower where the hands crept toward 5 with bureaucratic precision. We shall call upon the mayor tomorrow. It will be useful to see how loyalty behaves when it realizes it has been noticed. The mayor received Purbright and Sergeant Mally the next morning in the council chamber, a room which lent grandeur to evasions. The tall windows were curtained against the pale spring glare, giving the air a subdued solemnity. Councillor Granby looked as if he had not slept, yet was determined to appear unruffled, a man practicing calmness by the hour. My wife tells me you were impertinent yesterday, he began, summoning the weight of civic authority as one might summon an underwhelming fog. I expect an explanation, Inspector. Purbright inclined his head slightly. Of course, sir, you shall have one, though it may differ from the one you prefer. The mayor's lips tightened. If this is about Alderton, I've already given the Chronicle a statement. A tragedy, the result of overwork, nothing more. I'm afraid it was somewhat more, Mr. Mayor, and now it may become more still. Mr. Pomfret was preparing to expose financial irregularities, not merely in Alderton's department, but in the mayoral accounts themselves. Granby's face drained of its ceremonial color. Utterly absurd. My wife handles all those trifles. I concern myself with policy, not petty arithmetic. Indeed, Purbright said, and in Flaxborough, policy often serves as a charming euphemism for delegation without inquiry. Unfortunately, your wife's management appears to have been creative. Duplicate invoices, payments authorized twice, and a sum of nearly £60 unaccounted for. Granby gave a dry laugh that disintegrated halfway through. You're implying theft. You've no proof of anything, only gossip and bookkeeping errors. Gossip rarely travels far without sustenance, Purbright replied. Pomfret found those same figures. He meant to discuss them with you at the luncheon, but before he could, Mrs. Granby, unwittingly or not, set in motion a chain of assistance that ended in his death. The mayor sat back, gripping the arms of his chair. My wife may have made mistakes, but she is incapable of harm. Not of harm, no, but perhaps of suggestion. She mentioned to Alderton that Pomfret's pedantry threatened to disgrace the office. He took that as a call to loyalty, and loyalty in Flaxborough is rarely subtle. He dosed Pomfret's tea with digitalis from your garden. Granby turned slowly toward the window, the shoulders beneath his ceremonial jacket sagging. For a long moment the only sound was the measured tick of the council clock, untroubled by human impropriety. At last, he spoke quietly. You have what you need. Must you destroy the borough as well? Purbright regarded him with a kind of sympathy, the sort one reserves for people who have only just realized that their dignity is detachable. It's not destruction, Mr. Mayor. It's tidying up. When they left the chamber, Mally let out a long breath. You handled him gently, sir. Men of standing require gentleness, Purbright said. It softens the fall. Outside, the day was bright but uncomfortably clean, as though the town itself had been scrubbed too vigorously. A few passers-by glanced at them with curiosity. One or two even managed respect. The rest would know by tea-time that the mayor's wife was not quite herself, that Alderton had resigned suddenly, and that Inspector Purbright had been seen smiling faintly, which must mean something dreadful. Back at the station, the superintendent from Cawthorpe had arrived to collect statements. He was a broad man who treated scandal like a personal inconvenience. "Well, Purbright," he said, "another tidy piece of work. A pity about the publicity. The chief constable's anxious to keep the matter quiet." Purbright smiled thinly. "In Flaxborough, quiet is the loudest noise we have." The superintendent grunted, signed 2 papers, and left as briskly as decency permitted. When evening came, the station grew still. Purbright lingered at his desk, studying the file before him. The final report on Pomfret's death. There was satisfaction in the order of it. Each statement dated, each inference supported, each name balanced against another like figures in a ledger. Yet something in the symmetry troubled him. He rose, took his coat, and walked out into the dusk. The lamps along Market Street blinked on one by one, modest stars of municipal reliability. At the corner, Miss Doreen Vole was leaving the post office, her hat slightly askew and her expression bright with the knowledge of events. "Evening, Inspector," she called. "I suppose it's all over now." "As over as things ever are," he said. She smiled. "I said to Mrs. Grover only this morning it's always the respectable ones. The quietest people are the ones to watch." Purbright nodded. "Then you'll be quite safe, Miss Vole." She giggled, uncertain whether she'd been complimented or warned. When she had gone, he turned down toward the river path. The water lay still, reflecting the lamps like coins sunk in dark glass. Somewhere beyond the warehouses, a clock struck 9. He thought of Pomfret, his tidy desk, his obsession with balance, his mild astonishment at the final error that had claimed him. Then of Alderton, whose loyalty had curdled into fear, of Mrs. Granby, whose sense of propriety had proved more dangerous than spite, and of the mayor, still clinging to office with the desperate decorum of a man who suspects his portrait will soon be taken down. Flaxborough would go on, of course. It always did. By Monday, the shops would open, the council would convene, and the townspeople would murmur that things had been sorted. But Purbright knew better. Things were never sorted, merely rearranged until the next imbalance invited attention. He turned back toward the square, where the last traces of daylight clung to the church tower. As he walked, his thoughts returned, not to guilt or punishment, but to the strange precision of human folly, the way it calculated, justified, and finally convinced itself it was doing good. Somewhere, a cat darted across the cobbles, silent as an afterthought. Purbright paused, watching it vanish between 2 buildings, then continued on, his pace measured and unhurried, as if he were simply resuming the natural rhythm of the town itself. The next morning found Inspector Purbright in the small police garden behind the station, trimming a rose bush with the thoughtful air of a man unbothered by the moral weight of municipal scandal. The air was crisp, scented faintly with damp earth and the indefatigable optimism of spring. Sergeant Malley appeared at the doorway with his usual mixture of eagerness and hesitation, holding a newspaper folded into quarters. "Morning, sir," he began. "You'll have seen the Chronicle. They've made it sound like we've unmasked a conspiracy worthy of Parliament. Alderton's name's in print, the mayor's not, and Mrs. Granby's described as delicate with nerves." Purbright snipped at a branch, letting it fall precisely onto the growing pile at his feet. Flaxborough prefers its sinners penitent and its respectable slightly ill. Both make better copy than justice. "Still," Malley said, glancing at the paper, "I thought it would quiet things down, but it hasn't. The town clerk's been on the telephone twice already. He says there's talk that Pomfret didn't die of digitalis after all. Ah, Purbright said, setting down the shears. Rumour doing what truth cannot. Resurrecting the dead. He brushed soil from his cuffs. And what form does this revision take? Malley consulted his notes. Dr. Hockley says the post-mortem revealed something odd. The quantity of digitalis in Pomfret's stomach was too small to kill. He thinks there must have been another agent, one that stopped the heart before the poison had time to act. Purbright turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable. So we've been premature in our satisfaction, very like Flaxborough, always announcing the winner before counting the votes. Inside, the telephone rang again. Malley answered, listened, and turned back. That was the coroner's clock. They found traces of something else in the cup residue. Chloral hydrate, sir. A sedative. Common enough, Purbright said, but uncommon in tea. He paced to the window, his gaze settling on the town beyond, the church spire, the roofs glistening under a brief sun, the sense of fragile order that persisted only because it refused to question itself. Tell me, Malley, who else might have brewed that tea before Alderton fetched it? Could have been the caretaker, Malley said. Or Mrs. Granby, when she lent the service. She'd have washed it herself. Purbright nodded. And chloral hydrate is a household medicine, sold in small brown bottles for sleeplessness. The very sort of thing a lady troubled by civic anxieties might keep near her bedside. He took his hat and coat. Let us not disturb Mrs. Granby yet. She will be rearranging her conscience this morning, and I dislike interrupting domestic tasks. Instead, we'll call on Dr. Hockley. The police surgeon's consulting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale tobacco. He greeted them with his habitual lack of enthusiasm. If I'd known you were coming, Purbright, I'd have hidden the living patients. Sit down, if you must. Purbright smiled mildly. You're certain of the chloral? Quite. In small amounts it's harmless, but taken with digitalis, it might accelerate cardiac collapse. He'd have been unconscious within minutes. Would he have known? Barely. It was a gentle death, if that helps your paperwork. It seldom does, Purbright said. Could the two have been mixed accidentally? Hockley raised an eyebrow. If the tea maker suffered from both insomnia and an urge to tidy poisons into the sugar tin, possibly, but I'd wager on intent. Then intent it must be, Purbright said, standing. Thank you, Doctor. You've restored a measure of disorder to the case, which is always refreshing. Outside, Malley exhaled heavily. So Alderton didn't kill him, or he did but didn't know how. Perhaps Alderton poured the tea, but another had seasoned it. I suspect his loyalty was used rather more efficiently than he imagined. By afternoon, Purbright's inquiries had taken him again to Beech Lane. Miss Collingwood received him in the front parlour, her eyes tired but steady. Inspector, is it true you found something new? It's possible, he said. Tell me, Miss Collingwood, did Mrs. Granby ever visit the council offices on Friday? Her brow furrowed. Yes, briefly, just after 4. She brought biscuits for the luncheon committee. She was always particular about presentation. She left them in the kitchen next to the teapot. Purbright's expression did not change, but his gaze seemed to sharpen slightly, as though focusing on a figure in a mist. Did she see Mr. Alderton? I think so. They spoke in the corridor for a moment. He looked rather flustered afterward. When he rose to leave, she said softly, I keep wondering, Inspector, why did Mr. Pomfret lock the door if he wasn't alone? Purbright paused. Because, Miss Collingwood, even in death, some people prefer things properly secure. By dusk, the inspector stood once more outside the mayoral residence. The lights within glowed steadily, and from behind the curtains came the faint clink of porcelain. Mrs. Granby, seated by the hearth, poured herself tea from a familiar blue pot. For a long while, Purbright simply watched, his hands clasped behind him, as if waiting for the pattern to complete itself. He turned to Malley. You see, Sergeant, there are always 2 cups in these stories, the one we find and the one we don't. Mally looked uncertain. So she gave him the sedative before Alderton ever touched it? Most likely, a gentle precaution. She meant only to delay him, to give her husband time to correct the accounts before Pomfret could make trouble. But her medicine mixed with Alderton's poison, and the result was fatal. And she doesn't know. She suspects. People like Mrs. Granby always suspect what they cannot bear to admit. As they walked back through the square, Purbright glanced once more at the illuminated windows of the Granby house. "We'll speak to her tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tonight, let her sleep. It's her first honest rest in months." Morning arrived with a thin drizzle that softened the outlines of Flaxborough, as though the town itself were reluctant to face another day of explanation. The mayoral residence stood shuttered and prim, a house holding its breath. Inspector Purbright, whose temperament was neither impatient nor easily deterred, waited until the church clock struck 9 before ringing the bell. Sergeant Mally stood beside him, hat in hand, looking both respectful and curious, an expression common among those about to witness a confession they hadn't expected. Mrs. Granby answered the door herself. The housemaid, it appeared, had been given leave for nerves. She wore a pale blue dress that might once have been cheerful, and her hair, usually arranged with municipal precision, was untidy in a way that hinted at more than mere fatigue. "Inspector," she said quietly, "my husband is out. He thought it best to visit Calthorpe, officially." "I'm sure he did," Purbright replied. "But it's you I came to see." She hesitated, then stood aside. The drawing room was exactly as before, except that the tea tray from the night before still rested on the table. The pot was empty, the cups unwashed. Purbright noticed the faint scent of chloral still clinging to the porcelain. "You've discovered something," she said, not as a question, but as a weary admission. "I'm afraid we have," Purbright answered. "It appears Mr. Pomfret's tea contained 2 separate poisons, one prepared kindly, one less so. The digitalis, of course, was Alderton's contribution, but the chloral, well, that was rather more domestic." Her hand trembled slightly, and she turned away to pour herself water from a carafe. "I wanted only to quiet him. He was determined to make a spectacle of the luncheon, to shame us all. My husband said if the borough were disgraced, the county grant would be withdrawn. I thought, if I could delay him—" Her voice faltered. Purbright waited, giving silence its customary courtesy. "I mixed a little chloral into the sugar," she said at last. "Just enough to make him drowsy. I meant to warn him later after the luncheon. But then Alderton, oh, he was always eager to prove himself useful. I didn't know what he meant to do." Purbright regarded her gently. "You and Alderton each tried to preserve appearances. Between you achieved the opposite." Tears welled but did not fall. "It wasn't murder," she whispered. "It was prevention." "Prevention," Purbright repeated softly, "is merely foresight without imagination." He glanced toward the tea set. "Did your husband know?" "No," she said quickly. "He never knows. That's how he remains so very important." Purbright nodded once, almost approvingly. "You see, Mrs. Granby, it is often the guardians of respectability who supply the means for disorder. You may not have poured the fatal cup, but you brewed the situation." She looked at him then with sudden clarity. "What will you do with me, Inspector?" "Nothing unpleasant," he said. "Alderton's confession will suffice for the courts. Your part, though unkind to truth, will remain a domestic tragedy. I doubt the superintendent would thank me for widening the circle." She lowered her gaze. "You're very merciful." "I'm very practical," Purbright corrected. "Flaxborough needs its pillars upright, even when hollow. The scandal must have somewhere to lean." For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked with determined civility, marking the minutes between disgrace and absolution. Then Mrs. Granby drew herself up, smoothing her dress with deliberate calm. "I shall see that the mayor issues a statement," she said. "About Alderton, about the luncheon, something reassuring. "An excellent idea," Purbright said, reaching for his hat. Reassurance, like tea, is best served often and without much thought. When they stepped outside, Mally exhaled heavily, as if he had been holding his breath for the entire interview. "So she admits it, sir. That's it, then." "Almost," said Purbright. "The matter is tidy enough for the papers, but there remains the question of motive. Not the motive of action, that's simple enough, but the motive of silence. Why did Pomfret's death matter so little to them once it occurred?" Mally frowned. "Because it solved their problem." "Yes," Purbright said, "and because in Flaxborough, death is less an event than a convenience. It gives everyone permission to stop pretending they meant to do something else." They walked toward the station in the slow drizzle, passing the shops just opening for business. At the florist's, fresh lilies gleamed in the window. At the bakery, the first loaves of the day exhaled comfort into the damp air. Town life resumed its habitual indifference, the recent scandal already softening into anecdote. At the corner by the Green Swan, they met Miss Doreen Vole, who was already armed with an expression of privileged sorrow. "Inspector, you'll be glad to know everyone's taking it very philosophically," she said. "Mrs. Grover says the poor mayor's wife has been terribly unwell, and the vicar's planning a special hymn for Sunday. 'O Rest in the Lord,' quite appropriate." "Most fitting," Purbright said gravely. "Flaxborough thrives on appropriate hymns." She beamed at the approval and moved on, clearly certain that she was now part of the official record. Back in his office, Purbright settled at his desk. The file lay open before him, its neat columns and signatures like a miniature of the town itself. Orderly, constrained, and faintly dishonest. Through the window, the square glistened under the retreating rain. Mally placed 2 cups of tea between them. "Well, sir, I suppose that's another case closed." Purbright stirred his cup slowly, watching the ripples subside. "Closed, yes, but never finished. There's always 1 spoonful left at the bottom, undissolved." Mally smiled awkwardly. "You mean her, sir?" "I mean all of them," Purbright said. "Mrs. Granby will sleep better tonight. The mayor will continue to mistake survival for virtue. And the town will forgive them both, because forgiveness is easier than curiosity." He leaned back, folding his hands. "Still, it's a comfort to know that even hypocrisy, when tidied properly, can serve the public good." Outside, the bells of St. Ethelburga's began to toll the noon hour, their sound clear and unhurried, as if marking not time but the restoration of decorum. Purbright listened until the final chime faded, then reached for another sheet of paper and began a new report, its first words already resigned to the inevitable repetition of human nature. Why, the week's end, Flaxborough had restored itself to the comforting rhythm of daily trivia. The market once again smelled of apples and disinfectant. The Chronicle had moved on to speculation about a visiting theatre troupe, and Mrs. Granby, discreetly pale but still formidable, was seen arranging flowers in the church. Death, disgrace, and civic embarrassment had been folded neatly into the town's ledger of forgettable incidents. Inspector Purbright, however, remained mildly restless. It was not in his nature to pursue triumphs, but unfinished patterns, however small, had the same effect on him as an uneven picture frame might have on a parish curate. On Friday afternoon, he walked to the river bridge where the air was cool and the light soft with drizzle. The town lay quiet behind him, a polite accomplice pretending innocence. He heard footsteps approach and turned. It was the mayor, hat in hand, face carefully composed. Granby nodded, as if greeting an acquaintance rather than an adversary. "I thought it proper to thank you, Inspector," he began, "for handling things with discretion. The borough's reputation is intact, and my wife is recovering. The county has sent a letter of sympathy. I believe we can all move on now." "Indeed," said Purbright. "Flaxborough always moves on, generally in circles." Granby gave a thin smile. "You've been kind, more than duty required. I appreciate your restraint." Purbright studied him a moment. "Mr. Mayor, you strike me as a man who has learned the great secret of provincial success, that silence can be mistaken for virtue, provided it is expressed politely enough." Granby stiffened slightly. "I beg your pardon." "Oh, no offense intended. You see, I've been thinking about your wife's medicine. Chloral hydrate. Easily purchased, yes, but not in the amount we found. It was prepared in solution, carefully diluted. That's not an amateur's hand." The mayor's eyes flickered. "You mean to suggest that she didn't mix it herself?" Purbright said gently. "She believed she did. I imagine you told her what to use, even measured it out for her, under the guise of helping, of course. You knew she'd never endure the idea of deceit alone. And when Alderton blundered in with his dose of digitalis, fate kindly divided the guilt between you." Granby's voice hardened. "You've no proof of that?" Purbright smiled faintly. "None that would trouble a magistrate, but you see, Mr. Granby, my interest in proof is rather limited. I prefer understanding, and I understand that you let your wife believe herself culpable, because it spared the borough, and you the scandal of your own improvidence. A mayor's pride is a delicate organ." Granby's hand trembled slightly on the rail. "If you're implying—" "I imply nothing," Purbright said. "Flaxborough is allergic to implications. You will continue as a mayor until your term expires. Mrs. Granby will continue to play the gracious invalid, and I, in due course, shall file my report." He took off his hat as though ending a sermon and turned to leave. Behind him, Granby remained very still, gazing into the dull water below, where reflections blurred and straightened like conscience reconsidering its shape. That evening, Purbright sat in his office, writing his final notes. The report was brief and unadorned. Case concluded. Death of Edwin Pomfret. Cause: poisoning, accidental combination of substances administered independently by two parties. Primary offender deceased, Alderton. Secondary involvement, circumstantial, no public interest served by prosecution. He signed it, blotted it carefully, and closed the file. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added one last line beneath his signature. Motive: preservation of appearances. Satisfied, he locked the drawer. Outside, dusk was creeping into the square. The lamps glowed with their usual modesty, and the rain had begun again, a thin, whispering drizzle that polished the cobbles and blurred the edges of the world. Purbright put on his hat and walked toward the station door. Sergeant Malley looked up from his paperwork. "All finished, sir?" "For the moment," Purbright said. "Until the next moral emergency disguised as a civic misunderstanding." Malley grinned faintly. "You don't think this one'll stir up again?" "No," Purbright replied. "Flaxborough has an admirable talent for forgetting the precise things it ought to remember. That's how it remains so very peaceful." He stepped out into the rain, the door closing softly behind him. Across the square, a cat darted from one doorway to another, and the scent of baking bread drifted from the bakery. Somewhere, unseen, church bells began their slow, unhurried tolling, counting out an hour that meant nothing and everything at once. Purbright paused, listening, and smiled. One of those small, private smiles that belonged not to satisfaction, but to understanding. Then he walked on, his figure merging with the gentle mist that settled over Flaxborough, the town resuming its quiet industry of concealment